Hello, I'm Quanita Robinson, your host for Wisdom Work, and I'm here today with my first guest. I'm so excited, Bruce Perry. I reached out to him and he said yes. Bruce Perry's background is he's been in film and television and a writer and just, I think, a deep liver of life, I would say. And so I'm just excited to be in a conversation. I was telling Bruce just a couple of minutes ago, that my curiosity is about where is it that we find where our work life, or my background is in organizational development and management, and my spiritual life, like so long, for such a long time, I held them separate. And what I found is that at a certain point, I got that we're not compartmentalized people, we're whole human beings. And so this piece of like, what does it mean for me to become more and more integrated? Welcome, Bruce. What would you just open it up for you to introduce yourself a bit?
Lovely to see you again. Yeah, well that's a lovely introduction. I'm also really curious to see which way our conversation will go. Yeah, you're right. I guess I'm known for my work in television and film. I spent a decade or so with the BBC, making documentaries about indigenous wisdom, about globalization, about climate change, and so really beautiful insights into what's happening in the world, not only insofar as what the problems are, but also insofar as what the potential solutions are. And then I left the TV world to make a film, which was about nature connection and spirituality, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And so I've been in this space for a little while in the area that I think we're going to discuss. But my sort of prior incarnation, I can't even hardly recognize myself in my deep past, was like, I'm very institutionalized, English, British kind of boarding school Christian kind of character, very, very much BBC, Queen and Country. I joined the Marines when I left school, and so I know what it's like to be very much in the institution and very in that space. And then I've been on, I would say, a relatively strong path of questioning that's come from that time, that's brought me to a place that I feel is very different. And as it's never ended. There's always more layers of the onion to unravel and more questions to ask and more parts of ourselves to harmonize. But I've definitely managed to go through some really beautiful transformations and skin sheddings that have given me some wonderful insights. Yeah. That I'm really hoping that we can, to discuss and share.
That sounds great. One of the things that I know you mentioned just a little bit, and I think we've talked about it before, but you looking at living in intentional communities, and what are some of the things that kind of are inspiring you around that? Like, why is that important to you?
Thank you. Yeah. I guess what I realized was that the central word to a lot of what I was picking up over the years was connection, and connection to self, and almost healing journey, connection to nature, and also connection to others. And I realized that the more successful I'd become in my career, the more separate I'd become. The more money you get, the more separate you are, the more famous you get, the less you have to deal with people and all this sort of stuff. It's like the trajectory of our society and my life was very much into more into separation and isolation. And I realized that most of the indigenous peoples that I'd lived with was the reverse was true. And actually the ones that felt the most harmonious, the ones who seemed actually in some ways most content in themselves and their bodies, were the ones who had least separation, the ones who had least walls, who were all very much living with each other. And I realized that was something that I could easily dismiss as a time gone by, or I could really consider what that meant. And looking at this idea around the individual versus the collective as something that I've been really interested in for some time. And so I kind of came to the decision, or the sort of understanding that actually being in strong connection with a group of people and having an identity in that sense of belonging was something that I think would really help me in my life. And also I mean, I don't have kids, and maybe I won't, but to be part of a community that brings kids into a space where they know who they are because they know the characters around and they know the place and they know the ancestors that have been buried there, all these things that we don't have anymore, I feel has an aspect of sense of being that is something that I think could be a real gift to the coming generations, to try and reestablish this sense of belonging. So that's kind of what it was about. And in a way it's weird because like it goes against so much of what my driving force had been previously. My driving force had always been about these ideas of what success was. And it feels like you have to shedding some of the freedoms of individuality, shedding some of the freedoms of like free choice to go where I want, or free space, or free time, and all this sort of stuff, to prioritize a collective rather than the individual feels like a really scary journey, you know. But I guess I just have a belief that there's something positive on the other side of that.
I think one of the things for me, because, you know, being raised as an African-American woman, and an African-American family, mostly, I actually was raised in white families and African-American family, but there was a collective that I was just steeped in, you know,
Yeah.
because it was, it's such a communal, I had such a communal experience, and because my parents were 15 when I was born, so I like was brought home to my grandparents' home. So it was an intergenerational living that I got to be raised in for at least the beginning of my life. Um, you know, this piece around this individualization that you give up. I've been playing with the idea recently that we have this myth of independence. You know, I would say that I actually think independence is a trauma response, because I think we're always dependent. We're walking on the same earth, we're breathing the same air, we're drinking the same water. Like, we're always dependent. I think the question then is like, when we're in scarcity and lack, it's codependence. When we're in love and abundance, it's interdependence. And those moments where we really can find that place of knowing that I not only do we belong to each other, but we are each other, then, you know, I think we do get to be individuals, but I don't think we get to be independent.
I absolutely love you saying that. I've come to a similar place myself. It's beautiful what you talk about, you know, because for the last decade or so, there was this really big kickback about codependency, especially in the therapeutic realm, and like it almost felt like there was a denial of our interdependence, and like it was like, we know we have to all be islands, and I always question that. It's like, I've never known an indigenous group where everyone's an island. Of course if a member goes missing, they have deep loss and sadness, and it's like there's huge emotional responses to how everyone is within the group, and that's not a bad thing. We shouldn't be trying to avoid that. And I love the way you've described it as the difference between codependence and interdependence. I mean, you're using slightly different language to how I do, but I totally hear what you say, and I really love that. I think there's so much in it, and yeah, I would love to try and emulate something along those lines. I think it's the direction we have to go.
So what are some of the things that you think, you know, in all these different journeys that you've been able to take, what are some of the things that you've learned about, I've heard you, you know, speaking about initiation, I've heard you speaking about healing and trauma, and, you know, any of those avenues that you'd be, that you would love to share some of your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you for that invitation. Well, I guess the other thing about community is, you know, and this I think relates to all of the areas you just mentioned. It's like, you know, yeah, we are traumatized, I think, in many ways because of what happens to us when we're children, and like that's where most of the deep trauma occurs. And when I again spend time with indigenous groups, but not all indigenous groups, but some in particular, I think they have much less. Some of them have much less of that trauma because, you know, if you imagine that there's less walls, and the kids, when they're growing up, have the ability to flow between households, and each of those households have a shared value system and a shared day-to-day life generally, then there's then when mum and dad are having a difficult time in our society, we're stuck in those four walls, and no matter how much mum and dad try their very hardest to stop that that energy of whatever it is flowing out into their kids. We all know that kids are sponges, and so they're just receiving that, and whether it's things that shouldn't happen or things that should happen that don't happen, and there's a whole mixture of stuff. We're very, very sensitive beings, especially in the first 18 months of life. And so that's where a lot of us get our deepest psychological wounds. And I think that they just don't happen in the same way in community, whereby when mum and dad are having a tough time, you just go next door. You just go and hang out, and half the time the kids aren't hanging out with their parents anyway. They're all sort of like bringing each other up. And there's so many aspects to what I've noticed is happening in those types of societies, and the parents aren't as stressed either, because there's all that help on hand. I mean, you see just the release that parents have when they take their kids to the playground, and their shoulders drop because their kids can finally go and play. Well, I mean, that's happening in these societies all the time. It's just, that's how it is. And the reason it is because they're not fearful of their neighbors. They have common relationships, common values, and all these things with their groups. And so that those are the things that we definitely aren't doing the same anymore, and it really felt to me that would be a great advantage to have kids that could grow up in a space whereby they weren't having to deal with that base level of trauma of basically absent parenting or whatever it is, or even worse, to have like abusive parenting and all these things that very sadly are happening to so many of us. And so that's one thing. And then not only, but that doesn't mean to say that there isn't traumas in those communities. There aren't things that go wrong. They're not utopian. They're not idealistic. They just have a lot less, I think, in many ways, depending on the culture. I mean, I don't want to romanticize all Indigenous groups. There's some that are doing things that I would really struggle to wish upon others. It's like I'm not a hopeless romantic for all Indigenous peoples, but there are some groups, especially the egalitarian groups, the sort of pre-agricultural nomadic hunter-gatherer groups that I've met, who are really very, very extraordinary. And they're the ones that I take most of my wisdom from, I think. And there's like the parents aren't coercing the kids at all. The kids are free to be, which is a very hard thing to imagine doing in our world. But then they also have nearly all of these groups have amazing therapeutic practices as part of ritual within their societies as well. And so that can either be through plant medicines or through dance or song or all of these things that we're sort of learning about today in our societies, that so many of us are gaining so much healing from connecting with the ways of being around the world. And especially these healing modalities, and so they have that within their society as a relatively regular thing very often. And so that's another thing I think that it's great that we're reconnecting with, and so sad that we have so much healing to do.
Yeah. One of the things when you're speaking about the kids running around, what it made me think of is so my children, I have a 20-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter. She'll be 18 next month. And when they were younger and I was married, we used to have in our home potluck every first Friday of the month. We did it for 7 years. And it was anybody in our life, our kids' schools, our neighborhoods, our work that was welcome to come. We never knew who was going to come, but because everybody always knew what day it was, they could come or not come. And actually the biggest advocates for it was the kids. Like, I would have parents say like, my kid can't remember any other day on the calendar, but first Fridays they're asking. And part of it was the kids got to run around the house. All the adults were around. One of the reasons that we started it was I knew at a certain point, our children would go to the other adults in their life for things. And I wanted those adults to know us and to know our value system and what we stood for. So when my child comes to you, then you would know what I would be comfortable, with for them. And it just was a beautiful experience to have these children and families from all different backgrounds. I remember being struck one day where my daughter had asked me at one point, why don't we celebrate Hanukkah? And I said, because we're not Jewish, right? And so we had a friend though who came over every night of Hanukkah and celebrated with our family that year. And one of the
Wow.
nights happened to be on a first Friday. And
Okay.
so we're in my dining room
Mm.
and we have like probably about 20 people, 20 plus people at this point, and we're celebrating Hanukkah. And I'm looking around and there's only like 2 Jewish people in the room, right? And I'm thinking, who are my children called to be, that this is part of the experience of their growing up, you know? And so I
Mm.
think about like, and what they have to offer in the world because of that. You know, that
Mm.
wasn't my experience growing up, but
No. Yeah,
it was
beautiful.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, I think that, you started out by telling the story of your own sort of upbringing, and oh, that was in our chat before
Yes.
we came online.
Yeah.
But you described that
Yeah.
you naturally have come from more of a communal background than myself and many people like me, especially in this part of the world that I'm living. So you already have a much deeper understanding of communal life than I moved around every few years as a child. My dad was in the military, so so sometimes when I talk about these things, I see them as a relationship to what I have seen and experienced with indigenous peoples, but it's like it's really missing. It's actually missing already in my life, and it's missing in many people like me, our lives. But I think you already have a much deeper understanding of these types of insights anyway, just from your own lived experience as a child.
Well, and I think some of it too is, if we think about the feminine, just in, women tend to be more communal in nature with each other. And then as an African American woman, our culture, because it's more of a feminine, it's more of a matriarchal kind of culture, tends to be more feminine in nature. The partner that I tend to work with, he's a white Canadian man. And so he, has a different background. And so part of what we're learning together again is how does the integration happen then across cultures, right? Like what does it mean to come together? I think so often these days when we hear talk around like diversity and inclusion and all that stuff, it's held in kind of this warm and fuzzy way. But the thing that I think people often miss is if you're not doing your own personal work, your inner healing, then you can't give what you don't have. And I think so often we're in these cultures where we're told to like have compassion for others, but we don't even have it for ourselves yet.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Well, you've touched on something that's really profound for my own understanding and my own journeys. And I mentioned earlier about how it was the egalitarian tribes that the ones that in particular that are the ones that I sort of take inspiration from. And if I can give you just a 2-minute chat about why they are so important to me, it's like, I traveled the world living with all these wonderful indigenous groups, learning so much, and there was so much that I learned from those groups. But at the base level, I realized that actually there was still all sorts of problems that we have in our society as they do in theirs. But then the last group that I met with the Panan people in Borneo, and I realized, wow, they're completely coming from a different place. And they essentially, to take a very long story and make it short, they were egalitarian. And what I learned was that they basically aren't dealing with hierarchy and competition and ownership and these sorts of things that we are in our society, and nearly all other indigenous groups as well. They all have chiefs and shamans. And here was now finally meeting a group where there was complete harmony within, and I say that advisedly because that's a strong word, but they're genuinely not dealing with the types of problems around status and power in the same way. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why they were able to do that. But one of the strongest forces in that type of society is the women. And it's the coming together of the women as a collective that is basically probably the single most powerful aspect of how they maintain balance within their society. But interestingly, it's not matriarchal, because that's another form of hierarchy. So it's like the women are basically showing their power, and they're doing it in a way. And this was the other thing that was so mind-blowing to me. It's like, wow, this is what it's like to experience what female power is, when it's not in a patriarchy. So the women had their quality of powers completely their own. It wasn't like having to fit in with the male system or in order to behave like a man in order to be powerful. The women holding their own power in their own way, their own quality of power, however it is they wanted to express themselves. And then at the end of that, which was probably the most powerful expression of power in the society, which was all about, I mean, like, I wouldn't want to label it because that would be constraining it. You know, it was up to them to express themselves however they wished. But as a small visitor for a short period of time, it struck me that was like a playfulness, a laughter song, joking, sexual threat, as in like, you know, the threat of like sex strike and moving away. And teasing and lots of play, but it was actually incredibly powerful. You know, all the women together teasing the guys if they're being a lazy lover or if they're being aggressive in the home or whatever, but not teasing them as like toxic masculinity to exclude them, as like teasing them until they laughed at themselves. Yeah. And then they're back in, and then you're back in. So there's this beautiful play, but at the end of this expression of the women being themselves as this power body in the society, then they would step back and allow the men into the space, so that it was this play between the two was the main thing that maintained balance. And I just remember being absolutely blown away by that, because all of the other expressions of society I've seen around the world, here was what felt like the most harmonious groups. And this was one of their key elements, you know. And I was like, wow, thank you for that insight.
I love that. You know, one of the things I have a book called Soul Growing, and it's wisdom for 13-year-old boys from men around the world. And I asked all these men that I knew from about 17 different countries to complete the sentence, I wish somebody would have told me blank when I was 13. And one of the things that I wrote at the beginning of the book is a story I was told by a friend that we so get it backwards. We think that men carry the power and women carry the love, but when we're at our best, it's just the opposite. The men show up in pure love, we'll serve until, and the women show up and they use their power. We've chopped enough wood, we've fished enough fish, it's time to stop, right? And that in our culture, the women have forgotten to carry their power in the way that women carry it, and the men have forgotten to carry their love. And what I said with the book is, unbeknownst to me, because it didn't start off being a book, it was just a gift to a 13-year-old boy that I asked these men to complete this sentence for me. And I used my power to create a space, and they filled it with so much love. You know, the men were the ones that said, this needs to be a book for more than just him.
Beautiful.
And that piece that I hear you speaking to, it's not power in the way that we think of patriarchal power, right? Exactly. Or even, like you said, matriarchal power. I think what it is it's power in the way that the feminine holds it. You know, I know there was a summit recently I was invited to participate in, and at first I said yes, and then what I noticed is the coordination of the whole thing, it was for women, and the feminine was done in such a masculine way. I had to tell them, I can't do this. I can't, I couldn't, I physically couldn't do it, you know, because I think we have, in the rise of the feminine, we've misunderstood. We were just replacing who's at the top, right?
Yeah. I mean, I find this quite dangerous territory to enter into. So please correct me if I get my language wrong or anything, because this is like really difficult stuff for me as a white straight guy, English. Yeah, it's like I totally love what you say, and I was recently at COP26, which was the climate conference in Glasgow last year, and I remember there's so many sort of progressive voices saying what we need is parity here. Like there's a load of guys here on the desk, but what we need is as many women here, and people saying we need as many women in Parliament as we. And I'm like, that sounds like we've still got the male dominion, the male house, the male decision-making process, the male competitive space, the male thing, and we just want to have a bunch of women coming in and sharing this space with us, and then everything's fine. It's like, no. I think those women in the Benjeli tribe in Africa, in the Congo, who I was just talking about a second ago, if they were there, like, no, to hell with your house and your rules. No, we're gonna We're going to occupy our space doing it our way, and then you'll get to see what it is that we have to say, and then you can come and do your stuff again later. That's fine, but like, we're not going to just come into your space and play by your rules in order to show that we can be powerful, because then we're just going to be like you, and we're not. We're doing it our way. And so for me, I totally hear you. I totally hear you when you decided not to be there, because I get that. I get it. It's like, it's not the same. It's like, it's buying into the existing patriarchy, which is the problem.
Yes. And you can have diversity and not have inclusion, you know, and people can even report that they feel included and they're not being included. They're still like just doing the mouth of the patriarchy, right? Or whoever is in charge.
I think we've got really confused in the sort of like conflating equality with sameness.
Yes.
And we think that in order to be powerful, we have to be the same. Or in order to be equal, we have to be the same. It's not the case. It's like if you go to those egalitarian troops, it's like, no, they celebrate difference, that we are all different. The women are different to the men in that group. And this is another reason I took it out of my film, because this is a very complex thing to talk about, you know, but they are relatively binary as well. And it's like, oh my God, how on earth am I gonna, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. But all I can say is that this group worked in a really beautiful way, and this is how they went about it. And let's sit with that for a second and see what's going on there. But what's the main thing is that they're not all trying to be the same. They acknowledge that there's difference here. Yeah. And that was a big part of it.
Yeah, I think I get in, you know, kind of tricky territory too. Because one of the things I think is so much of the conversations that we have about gender or race, or maybe all of the deep topics, right, is so immature. So because we have such an adolescent culture, you know, and so
maybe it's a really tricky territory now, aren't you?
Yeah. So
oh my God, we're gonna have to take a subject soon. I'm just gonna be in all sorts of,
you know, and I say this all, I said, because we can't walk around like people say we can't walk around like we're colorblind. We can't walk around like we're body blind either. Like there's things that are important about me being here in this female body. You know, I was talking to a young woman yesterday, and who's actually newly married and was struggling with her partner. And part of it is because she's not recognizing that men and women are different. Like they see the world differently. And like when I brought that to her, and to say like, you know, because she was taking some of the things he was doing as him not caring about her, instead of, no, that's not what's happening at all. Like he's just seeing this particular way, and you have to communicate what you need because he doesn't know, right? Like so, and I think that's the danger of acting like it's the same, because then we have expectations of other that they often don't even know and sometimes can't fulfill for us, right? And the other thing I think is we think we want easy answers. So we think we can dictate to people, kind of do this and everything will be great, right? Instead of, you know, relationship, but I think it's in lieu of relationship. Like, you know, people get frustrated with me all the time because I don't do the pronoun thing. And I don't do it because I said that language has always been negotiated, not dictated. And so I have to care about you enough that it matters to me to shift. Because if I just do it to just be doing it, then it's not real. It's not real relationship. You know, so how do we be in real relationship with each other?
Yeah, wow. I that last little bit you're describing there, I think is really profound. You know, I live in a space where I'm not coming up against that very much, which is why I'm a little bit fearful of just talking about it, if I'm honest, because it's not something that's very much in my daily life. And so I'm not, I haven't had enough conversations with people who would, let's say, be demanding that of me.
Yeah.
But I really like how you yeah, you offered that. It's like, yeah, this, can we not discuss this or have a relationship around this? Let me find out. Let me find some motivation for going along this path that you're offering, or maybe demanding that, that doesn't feel fair. And I really hear that, and I think that's wisdom that I will actually carry forward in my own life, and I appreciate that. I think this whole area, as you can see, is like it's a complex one for me, and I am still fearful of getting my words wrong and stuff. I feel into it, and I believe that I'm carrying something that is questioning, and I definitely aren't just going along with things as they are being presented in huge swathes of society at the moment. And yet it feels really terrifying to sort of make a stand in that space. And I just want, and I don't know, what I know is what worked and what I've experienced. And I care for us as a species alongside all the other species, trying to find a harmonious future for us all. I know something that worked once. I don't know if that's a time gone by and that we're actually into a progression into something else that's really beautiful, and maybe I'm just a dinosaur and I haven't figured it out, or whether or not actually that we're moving away from something that really worked and that we're heading into dangerous waters. And the honest truth is, I don't know the answer to that. And so that's perhaps why I'm unwilling to sort of like stake my claim and plant my flag where I'm at just yet, because I guess it's and I hope it's not just fear of upsetting or being cancelled or whatever. It's a genuine inquiry still within me as to what's going on now. Is this a good direction or not? And I don't know the answer to that.
I'm really curious as well. What I find myself is, again, looking to where are the elders in this? Because like I said, I think it's been such an adolescent kind of culture in the conversations, because I think that what I see us moving toward, at least, if we're talking about gender, is like making everybody other, instead of like, how do we expand maybe what being a woman is, or expand what we see as being a man is. And so I think actually for me, it feels like we're going the wrong direction, but I don't know like what even the questions are that we should be asking, because I feel like that I don't have an experience that for me, again, like I said, knows what are the questions to ask, right? Like I think the place where I stake my claim is kind of that, like, until I hear something that feels like a better direction, where then then it's like and that's for everything. I think for me, I can put a stake in the ground where I am, but I'm always willing to move the stake, because I'm always looking for like because I want the learning, right? I want help, especially being a person who is participating and leading an initiatory process. Like, so, initiation typically has been gender specific, race specific, all of that. And we're doing this combined process because part of my thing is, how do you do that here in the US? It has to look different because the culture is different. So what's called then for initiation here, And so we've chosen to do it together. So we have men and women, different races, different religious backgrounds. And then it's like, so how do you do a culturally specific diverse initiation? And so what we've done is DNA. So every participant gets a DNA test, and they get to choose which lineage they want to dive deeper into while they're in the program. So that then it can be specific, even though we're together.
Wow. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
We're taking them on a 16-month journey. It's been, one of the things that I love is our first cohort finished a year and a half ago, I guess now. And they're still meeting. And matter of fact, they've like coordinated an alum retreat for the next month that they've invited Tennyson and I to come to. And their small groups are still meeting. Even one small group has even committed to go from 16 months together to 16 years. They're meeting once a month.
Wow.
And so, so I think that's for me the biggest like success to the program that I can say. And they're saying too, this is just the beginning, we need more.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow.
And so, this next group coming through, it's 5 retreats in the 16 months. So it's centered on the heroine's journey, and just the kind of coming together and being together in land and place. We have a retreat center that we work out of called Hope Springs. And in the middle, the second retreat, one of the things we've been doing is we tend to the fire. We like keep the fire for 2.5 days in 2-hour shifts. We rotate through, to give some experience of what does it mean to be in that communal experience where if the fire goes out on your watch, like, the whole community is depending on you. And I mean, both times we've done it, like this last time, it was snowing and raining, and the time before, it was like this huge storm. I mean, the state next to us, actually a tornado hit down during the time we're like tending to this fire. And it was just so energizing. One of the men said, I didn't know I needed the fire. We're so like,
so yeah, separated. Yeah.
From nature and from the earth. And, even taking the 3-5 days off to come is so hard for people. It's like, if you can't be away for 5 days, like, but the reason we do 5 days is because I believe it takes at least 3 days in nature to really even start to feel connected in that space, right? And so giving us time to be rooted and grounded together in those spaces.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, it reminds me, I was making a series for the BBC called Arctic, and went to all the different places, and one of them was Greenland. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but the indigenous people of Greenland, the Inuktitut and others, have really struggled with their loss of identity that's come from this massive shift in culture in recent decades. And so much so that there's loads and loads and loads of really very, very tragic stories and lots of problems. And so I went to visit one of the orphanages where there's loads of kids who've either got abusive or alcoholic parents as a result of this horrible shift, or this very complex shift that's gone on for them. And so here these kids in this orphanage, and it was really beautiful to see how this very experimental way that the people who are running the orphanage were doing things in a way that I don't think you'd get away with in the UK. I'm not sure about North America, but I don't think you'd get away with it here, because it's like quite radical. But they would take these kids and they would take them to some island, and they would basically drop them off in this island, and these are like, so, it's like, I don't know what age, they were like from 12 onwards, probably 12 to 18 or 20. And so the kids would arrive, and most of them had just come out of the city or whatever. So they're there with their mobile phones and whatever, but there's no electricity. So the phone after a day or two runs out of battery, and they're just there on this island. And the only other people that are on the island with them are these elders who are told to just get on with their thing. They're not like directly there to try and interact with the kids. They're just there fixing their fishing nets or going out to fish or doing some stuff with the sheep or whatever it is, and they're just getting on. And so the kids were just literally left there with nothing, with no direction, or it's like initially, like, I don't want to hang out with this old grandpa, what the hell does he know? And then like 2 days later it's like, well, what are you doing there? It's like, and then, but they would be there for about a month. About a month. And like that, I just thought that was radical. But by the end, the kids had gone through such a massive transformation, which is kind of like tough love in a way that I don't know that you would get away with that in my society. I don't know if you get away with that.
I don't think you could hear.
I was just blown away with the results that they were getting, and it was about nature connection and slowing down and kind of being forced into a space where they had to slow down. So like, I know that I won't be telling the whole story about how they deal with some of the stuff that will be coming up for those kids. I know that they're it's not just it's not a disposable type of process. There's deep care going on there, and I guess that I gave a very simplistic version of it. That it's not thoughtless. It's full of stuff. But I guess I was just making a point about the nature connection and the slowing down and how long it takes.
Well, and what that makes me think of, I often will say we're all swimming in the water of what's right, real, and true as white and male. And the problem with that, the patriarchy has often taken out nature and spirit out of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this piece about the surrender, like sending them to nature, to me, is that it's that place of when you have to surrender to it's nature and spirit, that it's not just you. I think that we are so teaching people that that they don't have to include nature or consider nature or spirit, that you are in charge of your own destiny, and you alone. And it just isn't true. I think that's why so many people were so traumatized even by the pandemic, is because they thought they had control over nature.
Control.
Yes, and
guess what? There's a more powerful force out there.
Yes.
They're just tapping you on the bum right now. Wait till the next time if you haven't woken up.
and I said, actually, I said, what better gift than a pandemic to give to a culture that has forgotten how to grieve? Because if you don't know how to grieve, you don't know how to live. They're so connected. And so this piece about, I think it challenged, for me, I saw people be really challenged by their relationship to death, to grief, to community, to self, to spirit, to nature, and I think everything shows up as trying to gift us. It's trying to help us find ourselves. And I think because I ultimately believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience and not the other way around.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's lovely to hear you. I mean, you're a bold speaker. You're a bold
well, as
speaker.
a woman of color, I think I can get away with a lot more.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of finding myself going, yeah, great, but I also, I know these things are nuanced, and I was the same, I have to admit, and I don't admit very often, but when the pandemic came across, I was like, cool, maybe this is an opportunity for us to wake up in all sorts of ways. And I know that's an easy line to say if you didn't have direct tragedy in my own life, and of course lots of people really struggled, and it was a very difficult time. But I do also share a belief that you just said there, that it's actually, we can see all these things as blessings. We can see all these things as opportunities for us to reevaluate and to wake up and to reconnect. And sometimes you need really big ones in order for us to do that societally and culturally. And so yeah, I also wish for us as a people, as a society, as a species, to go back into that space of reconnection that's so needed. And I think also the other thing that you mentioned there, you said early on, patriarchy. It's it was what I was going to say at the end of the chat we had earlier about sex and gender. It's in so many ways, I think that the patriarchy is at the heart of the problem. And the weird thing is that it's not even noticed by so many. It's just kind of invisible. And there are also incredibly powerful voices, intellectual voices out in the world, who are denying it's even there at all, and that's really tragic for me, because having had the beautiful experience of living in an egalitarian society and seeing what a human society can be like when it, as I said earlier, when we don't have to act like men in order to be powerful, and the women are fully in their own power in their own way. That's what I come back to again and again. It's that's what's needed in the world. That's what's missing so much in the world. And when you understand that, you realize that it is about patriarchy, because that and so many of these expressions and these kickbacks in all of these things that we've also been talking about, I think so much of it also comes back to the sort of trying to struggle out of this grip of the patriarchy. And I think that really is at the heart of so much of it. Yeah. And I say that as a white guy, but it's so clear to me.
Well, And what I think is that what I talked about, what's right, real, and true is we see as white and male. But then we use that as a yardstick for everything. And we don't realize we're using it as a yardstick, right? So I even say like what we consider privileged is only privileged if you're using that yardstick. But if you're not using that yardstick, it's not privileged to be disconnected from your heart, right? Like, so part of what I think we're being called to do is to change the whole yardstick. But like even here in the US, one of the things that's this big, it's a kind of everybody wants to claim anti-racist organizations and stuff like that. And I said, but a healed person wouldn't claim anti anything. So you know you're using the old yardstick to even create this new system. And then you can only get what you've always gotten. You know, and so I think what's being called, and I think that's part of the growing up actually, is you choosing what is your yardstick. You know, I think that's some of what I hear in you, and even your choice of like, I want to live a different way is part of what I think the growing up starts to do for us.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I totally hear that. You know, I went through my own journey, especially I did a trip down the Amazon looking at globalization and came back really awoken to the sort of problems of our society and the type of consumption and the effect that's having on so many other parts of the world, and the privilege of just being in a first world nation and the impact that's having everywhere. And I went through my own phase of anger and like shouting and screaming and like sort of and being sort of like an aggressive activist saying you're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. And it was only later that I wake up to the fact that like that's just me generally shouting at myself.
Yeah.
and only when I actually come into more harmony with my own way of being, then I realize that isn't the answer. It's like, it's not, if I'm just pointing the finger and going you're the problem, when that person can clearly see that I'm hypocritically doing the same thing, maybe to a lesser degree, but I'm definitely I'm projecting from my shadow aggressively out, and that is very visible to the outside, and it only causes division, and it causes those to not want to join, because it's like a them and us, as you said. And so only later have I realized that, okay, actually the real answer is it's not like you're the problem, it's like we're the problem. How can we resolve this and come into communion, come into discussion? And yeah, there are differences within that, and it doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't be held to account for where they're at, etc. But to make it you're the problem and the them and us, it just separates us all over again. And so I think that relates a little to what you were just saying, but that's my own experience around that same subject.
Yes, because back to kind of what I said earlier about we not only belong to each other, we are each other, right? And so that piece about if I'm tending to that part inside myself, you know, I'm tending to that part in the whole. And this piece, you know, I love, there's a book called Igniting Inspiration by John Marshall Roberts, I believe is who's the author. And he writes, there's 3 different ways to move something: body to body as force, mind to mind as persuasion, and spirit to spirit as inspiration. And he says, you know, to inspire. And so I think when, you know, I always say, if I can get myself in the room, then what happens is my soul speaks directly to yours and it commands you to meet me there. You don't even have a choice whether to come or not, because that's what it means to be connected. And so this piece about like, it's always a reflection of us, you know, if we can always go back. And that doesn't mean that we don't work things together. Actually, it's the opposite. I can't know me really without knowing you, because we are each other.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And I think when you take on that type of thinking, a lot of the judgment disappears, because you realize that actually, yes, you may be behaving in a way that looks and seems like it's incredibly disharmonious to the whole. Yes. But if and this is a point Charles Eisenstein makes really well, it's like, you know, but if I actually was to really analyze where you're at and who you are and why you're making those decisions, I would probably be doing the same thing if I was given all the litany of all of the different types of experience that you've had that's brought you to that moment. And because he would suggest that judgment is thinking that I would do better if I was in that situation than you. But actually, when you really look at the whole story, you find that that's probably not the case. And we're all doing the best we can. And I know that that goes against, you know, a lot of the narrative of our time. You know, we've got presidents who are saying, you know, there's an axis of evil and they're just bad. And we lock people up because they're just evil and all the rest of it. And so that's definitely in the system as how we're dealing with our society.
Yeah.
But when you take on that other type of thinking, which what you're offering is like, actually, and also I know it because I've been to an egalitarian society where they see any form of violence as a type of mental illness. It's like so far removed from their daily practice that it's just not even, it's just not there. And that's not me being a romantic. I am not just a romantic about Indigenous people. This is like, these are very specific groups that have a very, that have been studied. I remember talking to Jerome Lewis, who features in the film I made, and him saying, this group here, they're amongst the most peaceful people on the planet. And I remember saying to him, you can't say that, mate. I'm making a film. We've got to be really careful about what we say. And he goes, look, mate, I'm head of anthropology at UCL. When I say this, I'm not being lax in my words. By the means by which societies have been studied, we use the same methodology of investigation, and these types of groups, these egalitarian groups, come out by a large margin every time we do these studies. These are the most peaceful people on the planet, and there they are, no leaders, no laws, kind of anarchical people living out there in the forest. And so where's the evil there? Where's the axis of evil in that group? Where's the bad people that we need to lock up in that group? It's not that people are born bad, it's that the society is not supporting us to be our fullest selves in this interconnected way that you're talking about. And so I fully agree with you. I think that the environment is key always. The genes, we put so much emphasis on the genes, but it's not that. Like, we all have the capacity, because I believe it, because I've been there and I've felt it. We all have the capacity to be in harmony with each other and with this beautiful planet that we live on. We have that capacity, and we can find it again. The tools are there for us to reconnect with that. But
I believe that.
I
think that's why I do initiation work with these adults, because I think that if you don't have initiated adults, you can't have initiated elders. And if you don't have initiated elders, you can't initiate the youth. And I actually think that the most underutilized resource we have is initiated adults, because we each come with a genius to solve something on the earth, on the planet, and we're not getting access to that genius. There's a clip that's floating around on social media that I really love, and it's this man. He's on a subway train, I think, and he's like ranting and raving, and everybody's kind of like afraid. They don't know if he's on drugs or if he's mentally ill. And there's this grandmother who just reaches out and grabs his hand, and he calms down and then just starts crying. And somebody asked her afterwards, like, what made her do that? And she says, because I saw him as my son and he just needed to be touched,
Wow.
And it's like that.
There you have it. Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. I'd love to see that clip. Yeah.
If I find it, I'll send it your way. Yeah. So this has been, a juicy conversation. I've loved kind of being in the wayfinding with you. And just anything else that you would like to offer, Well,
I think this is basically exactly what we've been talking about, but I guess the place that I got to in my own thinking, and that I feel seems like there's so much synergy with your own thinking. It's like, we need to get these narratives out there of people going on the initiation, people becoming going on the healing journey. But for so many, that's really, really difficult. We have to have so much compassion that for all the tools and methodologies there are out there, actually the first step is the desire to look at oneself. And that we've done that, and we knew how hard that was for us, but for others it's going to be 10 times harder, because for all of the difficulties I may have had in my own life, I have no idea what it's like for some others. And so in some sense, it's no surprise that we are in the place we're at, because people would rather just keep moving than stop and do that reflection and go on that journey. And I think that the work that you're doing and the sort of stories that I'm also trying to put out there is this first step of like inspiring people to know that it's a worthwhile journey to go on. Because right now they don't even know that, you know, it's like, so to know that there are societies out there that don't have violence in them, to know that you've taken people on really difficult journeys and they've come out the other side, absolutely so grateful for the greater harmony they have in their lives. This is what's needed in society more than anything. It's just the inspiration for people to actually step forward and go, okay, I'm the common denominator in all of the problems in my life. Why I need to look at myself. And like that you know, after that, then you're on the journey, and they'll find you, they'll find others, they'll find the healing modalities and all the rest of it. We need to just inspire them to take that first step.
Yes.
And that's a really big thing that we need in our societies now. And so, yeah, just grateful for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you.
Good talking to you too. And one of the things I'll say, and just kind of speaking to what you just said, is that, you know, there's so many stories that we carry that confine us. Like, you know, what's for us, what's not for us, that we think that keeps us from going. And I think oftentimes people will see other people who've done some healing work and they think, oh, but you're different than them, right? Oh, but it's easy for you because they don't see you in the space where you're struggling and where you're like taking on the being courageous enough to step in, right? You know, I know for me, and like for whatever reason, and starting this podcast has been a hard journey for me. Like I had the idea and stuff for a long time, and the day that I reached out to you and asked, felt like an audacious day. I asked 3 people and I was like, okay, it's time to start. It was one of those things. And part of it is there's something about like what the stories we make up about what's for us and challenging those stories that can help free us. So thank you for your yes.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Lovely to see you again. I hope one day again in the flesh. It'd be so nice.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.